All right, let's move on to the final Hoffenheim topic, which will also tie into our next topic, and that's Tom Bischof. We're being pestered about this guy on the chat, rightfully so. A really interesting central midfielder whose stock has just exploded this season. 2 goals and 1 assist in 13 Bundesliga games, played all 6 Europa League games for Hoffenheim. A central midfielder, can also play defensive midfield. Some people have falsely labeled him, I think, as a playmaker. I think, when you look at the best comparable I see when it comes to Tom Bischof is a certain Leon Goretzka, which brings us right to the point, because there is a certain club in Munich that would like to sign Tom Bischof and bring him in on a free deal, because his contract, and this is, I don't understand how this happens. This is one of your biggest talents that you've ever produced, and he is out of contract by June 30th, 2025. Hoffenheim really, that's going to hurt them, I think, because right now it looks like he's going to leave for sure, whether it's for Frankfurt, for Bayern, or another club. And I don't quite understand how you can get yourself into that situation. But here we are, 19-year-old midfielder. Everyone wants him. Frankfurt and Bayern, both good options for him because he's actually Bavarian. He's from Aschaffenburg, but Aschaffenburg is at the very top part of Bavaria, very close to Frankfurt. So links to that region as well. I think what's really fascinating about this for me, and I've been following the story, and I came really close to actually write about it over the winter, but then opted not to because it's such a fluid situation that could change. I was under the impression that Bayern Munich had this deal nailed down, but that changed around the early days of January, with Eintracht Frankfurt coming in with a significant offer. And I think what Frankfurt can offer, what Bayern Munich cannot offer, is immediate playing time. And we've seen this play out before, right? I mean, Bayern Munich were really close with Asano Ouedraogo last summer. I mean, they were the front runners for a very long time to sign him. And then Leipzig come in, and Leipzig, hasn't quite worked out for Ouedraogo because he's been hurt. Although, in fairness, when Ouedraogo has been fit, he's been playing. And Leipzig could offer that, right? They could say, like, look, you could go to Bayern and they probably send you out on loan 3 or 4 times like they did with Wanner. Or you can come to us, you're part of the first team right away. You're going to play significant minutes. You're going to play Champions League football, which is probably also going to happen with Frankfurt next year, right? I think that just changes the equation for a young player like Bischof. You can go to Frankfurt right away now, play for a team that's competing for a Champions League spot, play regularly, and in 2 or 3 years, if it works out for you, the door is open for you to go wherever.
Yeah, exactly. This is a really interesting transfer story for a few reasons. The first one is obviously a very impressive young player who looks like he's going to be a huge star in the years to come. And 2 of Germany's biggest clubs are kind of going toe-to-toe to try and convince him to move to them. He's a free agent, which kind of allows Frankfurt a degree, not an advantage, but it takes away Bayern's advantage because they could obviously outbid Frankfurt if it came down to that. So it comes down to what kind of contract both teams offer, but also the kind of prospects that they both offer. And I think this is maybe where, and in that sense, I guess it kind of underlines the kind of troubles that Bayern have in recent years. And it's something that fans, at least the fans who've subscribed to our podcast and chat in the Matchday thread every week, have talked about for years and years. Bayern just do not develop enough young players, or at least they haven't done over the course of the last 5 or 6 seasons. And as you were just kind of talking there, I quickly jumped on Bayern's transfer page on Transfermarkt and just kind of went through the last 2 or 3 seasons. And I'm struggling to see any young players who have been signed by the club who have actually gone on to play regular first-team football. This season, the most obvious one would be, well, maybe not this season, but this season / last season was obviously Brian Zaragoza, who hasn't really played much. Maybe you could argue Michael Olise is still a young player, 23, which is understandable. He's played. You can kind of go through that list some more. And then the obvious ones, Ryan Gravenberch as well, 22 when he joined the club. But I think perhaps the most obvious one's Matthias Tell, who was signed under a huge amount of promise, a huge amount of surprise and interest, or intrigue and interest, and has since kind of stumbled back and really struggling for game time, and actually has been heavily linked with the departure from the club, and a player that's kind of been the source of a huge amount of frustration, because he was supposed to come in and be this kind of solution to a lot of problems, and whether it's Vincent Kompany or Thomas Tuchel or whoever, it hasn't really quite worked out for him. And you can kind of go through that list. There's a number of players there. Tanguy Nianzou, Alexander Nobel, Joshua Zirkzee. I'm just naming names here that, Michael Couson from Gladbach, maybe he's a bit older. Fete Arp, remember him from Hamburg? Is it Fete?
Fiete Arp.
Yeah, Fete Arp.
Now with Holstein Kiel in the Bundesliga, finally.
Exactly, yeah. So Bayern, understandably, are a club with lots of demands. They expect to challenge for the Champions League every year. They expect to win the Bundesliga every year. And that usually means that head coaches don't really have the time to blood young players in. And that's fine. That's Bayern's prerogative, and they continue to win trophies. And if that's how they want to keep winning trophies, then fair enough. But when it comes to these kind of situations where they're sitting down across the table from a young man like Tom Bischof and his agent, and they're trying to paint him a picture of how his future is going to work out at Bayern Munich, it's actually very hard. The only one actually I can think of on this list who maybe could be a potential, a suggestion for this, is the guy you mentioned, Leon Goretzka. He's probably the last kind of good young Bundesliga player who was signed by Bayern Munich and went on to become the star that he was supposed to become. But he was signed a season after Renato Sanchez. Before that, you obviously had Mario Götze, guys like that, Sinan Kurt from Gladbach, remember him?
Oh yeah, that was a mess of a transfer story. Remember that?
Sebastian
I think took Bayern to court.
Yeah, Sebastian Rode, remember him, of course. Oh, yeah. The list goes on, and it's and unfortunately it's a long list for Bayern Munich to contend with. Whereas Frankfurt have a growing portfolio of young players who blossomed. Now, we could do a whole show on why they don't seem to blossom elsewhere when Frankfurt sell them for a lot of money. But if I'm not mistaken, from what I've read, they've already got a plan in place that he will eventually be the successor to Mario Götze in this team. And you can understand exactly how he fits into that team. You can see him picking up game time. You can see him starting regular games. And if it was me, if I was his agent, if I was his dad or, family member who's trying to help him guide in his career, I would say, look, if you're destined to play for Bayern Munich, you can go to Frankfurt for 2 or 3 years, and then you'll play for Bayern Munich. If they're desperate for you, they'll sign you then. But I just think it's very, very hard to sell a young player on a move to Bayern Munich right now because, yes, there's Jamal Musiala. He's right there in the middle of the pitch, and there's Pavlovic as well, I suppose. And you can make these arguments for these younger players doing terribly well for the club. But they seem to be the exceptions to the rules rather than any suggestion that, young players get a fair whack at it at the Allianz Arena. And that might be something that comes down to decide what Tom Bischof decides to do this month.
Well, and I think the other factor in this is that I think Eintracht Frankfurt would be willing to sign him now for a transfer fee as well, right? To sort of accelerate it. And Hoffenheim might very well say well, it might not be a lot, but it's better than nothing. And that can also accelerate things in Frankfurt's favor. Look, Bayern might as well just come in and say, we really want this kid and we're going to offer more. But, as you mentioned, Mario Götze, I interviewed Mario Götze last summer, and he's a person, I think, that has really matured over the last few years. Makes a lot of money off the pitch with his investments in various different companies. He's a very smart guy, and has really kind of settled into that role of taking younger players by the hand and guiding them to not making the mistakes he made, to put it quite bluntly, right? And he's been very open about this. He wrote an open letter to himself, his younger self, and it was sort of seen as a guiding letter to other talents to not make the same mistakes that he made, chasing the money early and chasing, maybe a move to ambitious club too soon. And I think that's been taken to the heart by a lot of young German players. Florian Wirtz comes to mind, maybe Ultraogo as well, maybe Bischof is the next. And I think that is I think, something that if you can learn from Götze now, who's really seen everything and he's seen a lot and is really understands the business and maybe no other, because he's learned it the hard way. I think that is something that you want to maybe take. That doesn't mean Bayern are out of this race. I just think that where they were the favorite to 100% land him, that's now become a 50-50. And if you're Bischof, that's a really tough decision to make. But I think the smart decision here is probably Eintracht Frankfurt if I was him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think the other thing that's also worth bearing in mind is that since Julian Nagelsmann came into the German national team, this whole idea that you have to play for Dortmund or Bayern or perhaps maybe a Leverkusen to get into the national team has been completely blown out of the water. If you look at the national team now, it's full of Leverkusen players, it's full of Stuttgart players, Leipzig players, whatever. Nagelsmann has been very open about experimenting, about welcoming young players in, about trying new players.
Yeah.
And it now means that if you're a young player like Bischoff and you want to play for your national team, then you can, start at Frankfurt. You don't have to play for Bayern Munich. You don't have to play at Borussia Dortmund. You don't have to go to England and play for Chelsea or Arsenal. I'm sure he will maybe one day, but right now, he can play for the national team or at least get a call up. I'm actually also just assuming he's German, which I've just realised I probably...
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I don't...
He's a youth national team player.
Yeah, I don't know why the back of my head I thought it was maybe a second nationality that was getting stuck in my head, or maybe I was confusing with someone else. But yeah, the point is, maybe 5-10 years ago, the argument was if you want to play for the national team, you have to play for Bayern, or maybe do very well for Borussia Dortmund. But I just don't think that argument's there anymore, so that makes a club like Frankfurt even more appealing.
No, Nagelsmann coaches the national team like he coaches a club team, right? He sees a player that fits a role and doesn't really... Even performance in the Bundesliga matter, but it doesn't matter who the performances are for. And the role and the fit is almost more important for him, right? That's why Tim Kleindienst is the number one striker at the moment, over Füllkrug even, for the German national team, because he fits that team. And yeah, that's a really important point. I think what you meant with his second nationality, Stefan, he's Bavarian. That's probably it.